Hey folks, this one has been on my list for a while, and I've been wanting to cover it properly again for quite some time now. If you're from the north of England, or from Manchester specifically, then there's a reasonable chance you've already heard of the Manchester Canal Disappearances and the supposed Manchester Pusher. If you haven't, then today I want to walk you through the cases that gave rise to the idea of a pusher, as well as the bigger picture surrounding it all. And at the end, I'd love to hear what you make of it. Since around 2008, and in some estimations stretching back as far as 2004, more than 85 bodies have been pulled from Greater Manchester's canals and waterways. The overwhelming majority of those have been young men, typically around their early 20s or just under, and the incidents are concentrated almost entirely in the hours following a night out in the city centre. Greater Manchester Police have consistently attributed these incidents to a combination of having too much to drink, dark and unfenced towpaths, and accidental falls. They've conducted two formal cross-case reviews and both times concluded that there is no evidence connecting those that disappeared. But some of the families of those who went missing, a number of journalists, and at least one academic voice have not been satisfied with that explanation, and the phrase the Manchester Pusher has become shorthand for the idea that at least some of these incidents may not have been accidents at all. To understand why that idea took hold, it's worth noting something that is genuinely quite interesting. Birmingham has a more extensive canal network than Manchester does, and it also has a significantly higher population. Yet the rate that people pass away in Manchester's waterways is roughly double that of Birmingham's. Across the UK as a whole, less than 30% of people who end up passing away in a waterway involves drinking. In Manchester, however, this appears to be a consistent feature in almost every one of these cases. Whether that simply reflects the unique geography of a city where the nightlife is built directly alongside a dense, largely unlit, and largely unfenced 50-mile canal network, or whether it points to something else entirely is the central question. The city's relationship with its canals is inseparable from its cultural identity in some sense. From the late 1980s onwards, the rise of the Manchester scene and the influence of factory records transformed the canal-side areas of the city into a thriving nightlife hotspot. The Hacienda, the Warehouse Project, the bars and clubs of Canal Street, and the Northern Quarter, all of them sit essentially on the water's edge. If you've ever walked through Manchester late at night, you'll know that it's entirely possible, and quite easy, to find yourself metres from an unfenced canal without really intending to be. That's the case the police make, and it's not an unreasonable one. But then you look at the individual cases, and things become considerably harder to explain away. The case most often cited as the anchor for the pusher idea is that of David Plunkett, who I've spoken about a few times across the channel. David was 21 years old and 1 month away from completing a 4-year event management degree at Leeds Metropolitan University, where, as well as his studies, he'd been taking on voluntary roles, from box office work to bar work. Those who knew him described him as bright, friendly, happy and outgoing, and he was well liked by everyone around him. On the night of the 17th of April 2004, David and his friend Michael found themselves on a mystery tour night around Manchester. At some point during the evening, the two of them ended up at a Budweiser music festival at the Daytona racetrack in Trafford Park, an invitation-only event with DJs and bands playing. Guests had been given 6 tokens each for free drinks, but by various accounts, these free drinks ended up being given out quite liberally as the night wore on. At some point, David ended up being removed from the venue by security after having had too much to drink. Michael was still inside, unaware that David had already been ejected, and his searches for his friend in that crowded venue were now futile. That was the last time David was ever seen. While David was now outside and alone, Michael was still inside, searching and calling David's phone, getting no answer. At 1:10 AM, Michael called David's parents, Anne and Mike, at their home in Halifax to tell them he had lost track of David and simply couldn't find him. Anne reassured him and took over, calling David herself. She reached him 5 minutes later at around 1:15 AM. What she found when he answered was immediately alarming. He was incoherent, There was no background noise of any kind. He appeared confused and afraid, and was using language and swearing that he had never used in front of his parents before. Then, around 10 minutes into the call, at roughly 1:25 AM, he said something that has stayed with everyone who has followed this case. He told Anne, "I'm turning right, turning right, turning right." He said that 3 times before breaking into a scream. Anne handed the phone to Mike and called the emergency services, but because they had no idea where he was, very little could be done. Mike held the line as the screaming continued briefly, and then everything fell completely silent, despite the call remaining connected. They kept the line open until 4:30 in the morning. There was no further contact from David after that scream. Phone records placed him somewhere between Salford Quays and the Old Trafford football ground when the call was answered. Mike described the scream as an unearthly howl and said that he had never heard anything like it before. What his parents found most striking, beyond the sound itself, was the complete silence that surrounded it. There were no cars, no voices, and no running footsteps. Anne essentially made the point that it came completely out of the blue, as though he had become suddenly startled. A major search was launched, and on the 30th of April, David's body was discovered in the Manchester Ship Canal near this museum 2 weeks after he disappeared, and in an area that had already been searched, though that might not be too surprising in a body of water where things get pushed around. A coroner's inquest held in April of 2005 heard from Home Office pathologist Dr. John Rutherford, who stated there was no evidence of foul play, and that the most likely cause was that he'd passed away while in the water. It was also established that David had been more than twice over the legal driving limit at this time, though the inquest returned no finding of substances, meaning no formal evidence that his drinks had been interfered with. There is one further detail that needs bringing up. When David's uncle later searched the area, he found David's mobile phone upstream from where the body had been recovered, despite the police having already conducted an extensive search. The call had started at around 1:15 AM and remained connected until 4:30 AM, a period of over 3 hours. It has never been made entirely clear in any of the reporting that I have come across whether the phone was found on land or in the water. Given how long the call remained connected, it's difficult to imagine it was in the canal. If it was on land, then David entered the water at some point without it, meaning he'd either dropped it or it had been left behind beforehand for some reason. And if that was the case, why did the initial police search not locate it, when David's uncle managed to find it afterwards? There are no clear answers that I can find to those questions. Former Detective Chief Superintendent Tony Blockley, who examined a number of these cases independently, found the circumstances utterly bizarre. He raised the question of whether David had been chased or lured, and pointed out that had David fallen into the water, his parents would almost certainly have heard the splash through the open phone line. They heard nothing of the kind. Just that scream, and then nothing else other than the silence. Mike stated that something had terrified his son, and that he was on the phone and could not speak to them, and that it was not because of how much he'd had to drink. Anne said the screaming and howling was so unearthly that they just knew that there had to be something more to it. David's parents never accepted the accidental verdict. Whatever caused David to say those words and then scream like that on that phone call in the early hours of the 18th of April 2004 has never been established. 6 years later, a very similar set of circumstances would unfold. Nathan Tomlinson was 21 years old and a trainee sports science teacher from Brennington in Stockport. On the 17th of December 2010, Nathan went out with his colleagues for a Christmas party and was last seen leaving the Mitra bar shortly before 10:15 PM alone in heavy snow. Witnesses at the bar said that shortly before he left, an unknown woman had slapped him. She was never traced or identified. Earlier that evening, he had sent a text message to his mother, Tina, saying that he was pacing himself and only drinking shandy. That message matters because what came next doesn't really fit the picture of someone stumbling blindly into a river. CCTV tracked Nathan walking through Manchester after leaving the bar. He was captured making his way to Chapel Street in Salford. There, he briefly boarded a bus to ask for directions, apparently trying to find his way home to Stockport. A bus driver directed him towards Piccadilly Station to catch a train back. Nathan never made it there. The last confirmed CCTV sighting showed someone, believed to have been him, running through the snow across the Adelphi footbridge, near the River Irwell. He turned left after crossing the bridge and walked out of frame. Nobody ever saw him again. What Tony Blockley found when he retraced Nathan's route is worth dwelling on. The route from the Mitra bar to Nathan's last known location was not direct, but was quite circuitous, covering roughly 2.5 miles. According to Blockley, it took him 44 minutes to walk the same route. Nathan apparently covered it in around 22 minutes. That discrepancy has never been explained, but it must certainly suggest that he was moving quickly for some reason, if it was actually him. Tina has suggested that the figure captured on CCTV may not have been Nathan at all. Even though it was believed to have been him, it seems it's not really fully agreed upon as to who it was. Though if it was Nathan, then the question is, why would he have been running at all? Because the cameras never showed anyone near him, or whoever this person was, and just nothing visible to account for it. Nathan's body was found 8 weeks later by a member of the public in the River Irwell near Meadow Road in Lower Broughton. This was despite police divers having already searched that stretch during the investigation, and despite there being CCTV cameras at the Old Pine Pot pub on Adelphi Street, directly near where he was found, and they were never reviewed by police at any point during the investigation. The pathologist concluded that Nathan had probably passed away in the water, but said it was uncertain how he had ended up in the river, and even whether he had passed away before entering the water. When he was found, his coat, phone, passport and wallet were all missing. Coroner John Pollard concluded the 2-day inquest with an open verdict and wrote directly to Chief Constable Peter Fahey to raise his concerns about the pace and thoroughness of the investigation. It is also worth noting that Nathan was one of 11 people who passed away in Greater Manchester's waterways during 2010 alone. Tina has always maintained that she believed that her son's passing was suspicious. The entire time that Nathan spent off camera, it has never been established what was happening. It's not clear if he bumped into someone with ill intentions. The fact that his coat, phone and wallet were missing could suggest that they were taken from him, though that is speculation on my part and has never been proven either way. Almost 2 years would pass before the next cases in this story emerged, and when they arrived in the summer of 2012, 2 of them came within weeks of each other. The first tends to receive far less attention than the others. On the evening of the 4th of June 2012, a man in his 40s set out to visit Manchester's LGBT nightlife district. He was last seen that evening in the Blackfriars area of the city. 5 days later, on the 9th of June, his body was found in the water on Canal Street at around 1:50 in the afternoon. The post-mortem found no injuries. It was recorded as an accidental passing. What makes this case sit uneasily is a detail that the Greater Manchester Police disclosed during the investigation. Around the same time and in the same area, officers had linked 2 separate assaults. One of those assaults involved another man being pushed directly into the canal. The GMP stated that they could not make a formal connection between those assaults and this particular incident, but a confirmed canal push, one in which another man was physically forced into that same stretch of water, occurring within the same short window of time as someone passing away in the canal in unexplained circumstances, is the kind of overlap that has always made the idea of a pusher difficult to dismiss for some. Whatever explanation exists for how he came to be in that water has never been publicly established. He has never been publicly named either. On the 29th of June 2012, Chris Brahney went to the opening night of the Stone Roses reunion concerts at Heaton Park. He was 22 from Timperley and he went alongside his friend Mark and a large group. At around 11:30 in the evening, before the gig had even ended, Chris realised that he had lost his phone somewhere in the crowd. By the time the concert was finished, he and Mark had become separated in the chaos of tens of thousands of people leaving at once. CCTV tracked Chris to Shude Hill Metrolink station, where he retrieved a pair of shoes that he and Mark had stashed there beforehand, having worn wellies to the concert, and wanting to change before going out into the city afterwards. He was then spotted at a park and ride site set up for the concert, where he reportedly spoke to a group of young women and told them he had lost his phone and his friends. From there, he made his way into the city centre and eventually to around here, where he turned down a remote alley that led to a riverside walkway. Chris's body was found 10 days later in the Manchester Ship Canal. At the inquest, the deputy coroner stated plainly that she did not have the evidence to determine exactly how Chris came to be in the water. The pathologist noted that the walkway at the end of that alley was lined with a very high railing, and that Chris must either have climbed over it or been thrown over it into the water 40 feet below. The detective leading the investigation ruled out third-party involvement, pointing out that there was only one way in and out of that alley, and that no one had entered or exited for many hours before or after Chris. Some cuts were found on his face, but the pathologist concluded these had occurred after he entered the water, as they were not accompanied by bruising. Chris had been drinking, and substances were found in his system, and it was noted that while these may have altered his perception and mood, they were not the cause of his passing. A witness whose flat backed onto the walkway said he had seen someone matching Chris's description sitting in the alley with his back to the railing during the early hours. His father was completely dismissive of any suggestion that this was self-inflicted. The deputy coroner concluded that she simply could not say how Chris had ended up in the water. Whatever happened or unfolded that night in that alley is not known. Just weeks after the Stone Roses concert, another young man would disappear from Manchester's waterways in circumstances that would generate perhaps more scrutiny than any of the others. Souvik Pal was 18 years old and a product design engineering student at Manchester Metropolitan University. He had come from Bangalore just that summer, only a few months before that New Year's Eve, to begin his undergraduate degree at MMU. It was among his first real experiences of life in England. He was a music enthusiast who had aspired to become a singer and DJ, and his tutors described him as a really fine young man, very approachable and gifted, who had genuinely embraced his studies. He was living at Cavendish Halls of Residence on Cambridge Street. He was also, as it happened, just 3 days away from his 19th birthday. On the 31st of December 2012, Souvik went to the warehouse project at Trafford Wharf with a group of friends for New Year's Eve. He had been drinking and had taken substances during the night, and at around 10 in the evening he got into a confrontation with security after trying to jump the queue for the toilets. He was ejected from the venue at around 10:55 PM and was captured on CCTV outside the building at 11 PM. That was the last time he was seen. He tried to text his friends to tell them that he'd been thrown out, but the phone networks were so busy on New Year's Eve that his messages did not go through until the following day. His roommate reported him missing on the 1st of January. When news reached his father, Santanu, in Bangalore, he flew immediately to Manchester, arriving on the 6th of January, and threw himself into the search efforts, meeting with police, university officials and members of the local community in an attempt to find his son. Sadly, his body was recovered 22 days later from the Bridgewater Canal, just 50 feet from the club he was ejected from. Coroner Joanne Kersley recorded an open verdict, stating that despite an extensive investigation, it could not be established where or how Souvik had entered the water. But it's the CCTV footage that makes this case stand out from the others. The cameras captured Souvik outside the venue at 11 PM, and then captured something much more significant. He was seen walking across a bridge over the Bridgewater Canal in the company of an unidentified man. Souvik then attempted to climb a railing on the far side of the canal. The unidentified man was seen walking back towards the club alone. That man has never been identified. The explanation given for Souvik's attempt to climb the fence was that he was trying to get back over it to get back to the club. However, as Tony Blockley pointed out, the fence Souvik appeared to have been trying to climb was on the far side of the canal from the club he had been thrown out of. The idea that he was simply trying to get back inside begins to fall apart. It means not only did he need to climb over that fence, but then he would have needed to swim back across the canal itself. It doesn't seem reasonable to suggest that his plan was to get absolutely soaked and then try to re-enter the club. So, why was he on the other side of the canal? Why was he trying to climb the fence? Who was the man walking with him? And why did he walk back alone? Santanu said publicly that he believed that there must have been a third party involved, and that it needed to be investigated to determine whether another person was really responsible for his son's disappearance. To this day, the man on CCTV walking with Souvik across that canal bridge on New Year's Eve 2012 has never been identified. Just over a year after Souvik Pal's body was recovered, another case would add to the cluster. In the early hours of Saturday the 28th of December 2013, 17-year-old Adam Pickup from Stockport was out in Manchester City during the Christmas period. CCTV picked him up on Oxford Road, and the footage showed him in a conversation with a couple. That appears to have been the last confirmed sighting of him. He was reported missing, and 2 days later, on Monday the 30th of December, Adam's body was found in the canal near Deansgate train station at around 3:30 in the afternoon. He was the youngest person by some distance among those most commonly associated with the broader pattern, and his age gives this weight a particular weight. He had simply gone out for a night over Christmas and never came home. What set this case apart in a concrete sense was what happened during the search. 2 men were arrested, though both were subsequently released without charge. GMP stated that after the post-mortem, that Adam had passed away as a result of a fall, and the coroner did not record foul play. It has never been revealed what exactly led to those arrests, what information the 2 men provided, or what evidence, if any, that pointed to them in the first place. The couple seen talking to Adam on CCTV on Oxford Road were also never publicly identified, or at least not that I could find in any reporting. That isn't necessarily unusual in isolation though. It's not really surprising that a brief conversation on a city centre street late at night would go untraced. But taken alongside the arrests and releases, and the gap between his last sighting and the discovery of his body, this case sits among the others in the same familiar way. You have an explanation that closes the file, alongside an incident that doesn't appear to be 100% provable in any direction. The case that reignited conversations around the pusher was that of Charlie Pope. Charlie was 19 years old and in his first year at the University of Manchester, studying economics with philosophy. He was from Pontland in Northumberland, where he had achieved 3 A-levels at Pontland High School before heading to Manchester. Those who knew him remembered him as funny, argumentative in the best possible way, as he was always up for a debate. He had a brother living in New Zealand and a sister studying in Japan at the time of his passing. On the night of the 28th of February 2018, during the severe winter storm that came to be known as the Beast from the East, Charlie and his flatmate Lewis Wright shared some drinks at their halls of residence Oak House in Fallowfield, before heading into the city centre to the Zombie Shack on New Wakefield Street, where they drank cocktails together. Later that evening, when they tried to board a bus home together, the driver refused to let Charlie travel, saying he'd had too much to drink to be allowed to board. Charlie being allowed on that bus that night would have changed everything. The pair went back to the Zombie Shack. The plan seemed to be that they would stay there for a while and then try again to get home. But at some point, it appears as though they got separated. Lewis left at around 2 AM, assuming Charlie was with other friends or had already made his way home. The following morning, Lewis noted he had missed a Facebook call from Charlie at around 6 AM. His return calls went unanswered, and Charlie was reported missing. 2 days later, on the 2nd of March, Charlie's body was found by Northwest Underwater Search and Marine officers in the water near Rain Bar on Great Bridgewater Street. At the inquest, Detective Inspector Gareth Davis told the court that CCTV had captured Charlie leaving the zombie shack at around 1:20 in the morning and heading along Oxford Road in the direction of his home in Fallowfield. That should have been the beginning of his route home. Instead, after what police described as 3 missing hours during which they did not know where he was or what he was doing, the cameras picked him up again at 4:43 in the morning, heading back along Oxford Road towards the city centre and away from his home. After the second sighting, he was walking unsteadily through the snow, down Whitworth Street, past the Lock Building and towards the towpath and towards a lock gate near Lock 89 of the Rochdale Canal, before moving out of camera range. Snapchat and a phone call placed him alive at around 6 AM. At some point after that, he fell into the canal, although there was no CCTV to tell exactly where, when or how that happened. Detective Inspector Davis confirmed there were no suspicious circumstances surrounding his passing. Coroner Nigel Meadows concluded that Charlie's passing was accidental after he had drank a significant amount that night. Pathologist Dr. Al Haber stated that Charlie had passed away in the water with cold shock, hypothermia, and that a toxicology report had found that he had drank so much that he was at more than twice the legal driving limit. What many people have pointed to is those missing 3 hours and that reversal of direction. He knew his way home and he was heading there. It has been argued that something in those 3 hours led him to turn around and walk back towards the canal, and it's simply not known what it was. However, given how much he'd had to drink that night, I don't think you really need to invoke the idea of foul play. I think it's quite a reasonable and fair suggestion to make that he had simply become so disoriented that he'd completely lost his way and his bearings. His father, Nick, channeled this loss into something tangible. He launched the Make Charlie Last campaign, which gathered nearly 100,000 signatures on a Change.org petition, and ultimately succeeded in having permanent barriers installed along the highest risk stretches of the Rochdale Canal in 2019. The Undercroft section between Dale Street and Minchell Street is now locked nightly between 10 PM and 7 AM. Nick went further still, partnering with Tyne and Weir Fire and Rescue Services to push water safety across the region, and championing the installation of throwbags along Newcastle's quayside to give people a chance of getting out if they do end up in the water. The idea that a single individual, this supposed pusher, might be responsible for all or many of these cases was popularised publicly in January of 2015, when the Daily Star Sunday ran an article reporting that 61 bodies had been pulled from the Greater Manchester's waterways since 2008. Professor Craig Jackson, head of psychology at Birmingham City University, at least at the time, was quoted saying that it was extremely unlikely that such a number of these cases were the result of accidents alone, that canals were not popular spots, particularly for men, where one might purposefully want to go missing forever, but that they were popular dumping sites, and that some of the cases had the hallmarks of foul play. Professor Jackson later complained that his remarks had been significantly taken out of context, and it is worth bearing that in mind. The statements he made were actually reasonable and likely matches with reality quite closely, though it seems that the tabloids misconstrued it as Professor Jackson stating that there was definitely a singular pusher, which is not what he was saying. But by the time the article went out, the hashtag #ThePusher was already circulating on social media, and the theory had crossed from local rumour into national news. A Channel 4 film in 2016 put the total figure at 85 such cases since 2008, with 72 of the victims being male, and 28 cases having returned open verdicts. GMP have not been passive in the face of the theory. They conducted a formal review of the cases in 2014 and 2015, which concluded there was no evidence to suggest that the cases were linked or suspicious, and a second thematic review in 2016, specifically examining the pusher hypothesis, reached the same conclusion. In June 2018, they released a YouTube video directly rebutting the Channel 4 film hours before its rebroadcast. Tony Blockley made the point in the film that if a pusher really was responsible, they would need some reliable way of ensuring a person pushed into the water would not be able to get out, which is not straightforward. They would also have to have a significant knowledge of CCTV coverage of the entire city surrounding the canals, basically. The overall position is consistent. There's no forensic link or shared signature, and no strong evidence of a connection between the cases. It is worth bearing in mind though, that there have also been confirmed cases of people being deliberately pushed into the canals. In 2013, Simon Brass was stopped by a group of people who tried to take his possessions from him, and Simon was then subsequently pushed into the canal. Simon sadly did not make it out, and 5 of those who were responsible were convicted. In April 2018, a cyclist near Old Trafford was knocked into the Bridgewater Canal by an unknown man who then kicked him back in as he was trying to climb out. Thankfully, the cyclist did get out of. The attacker was never identified. GMP said that there was no evidence that this was linked to any other incident, and I take that at face value. But it does demonstrate, rather plainly, that people are sometimes deliberately pushed into canals by strangers, and that those strangers are sometimes never caught. There are others too, and more recent ones at that. I want to be honest about where I land on this. I don't think there is a single pusher behind all 85 or more of these cases. That seems genuinely implausible to me, and the police's point about the geography of the city is not without its merit. A dense nightlife, besides unlit, unfenced waterways, combined with a significant drinking culture and poor visibility in some areas, is a recipe for such incidents. The world can produce terrible statistics even without a single malevolent individual behind them. But the idea that every one of these cases was a straightforward accident is also very difficult to accept when you sit with the individual cases. The phone call with David Plunkett, the missing items and the unexplained speed of Nathan Tomlinson's route, the unidentified man walking with Souvik Pal on the CCTV on New Year's Eve. The issue, obviously, is that there is no hard evidence to suggest foul play, and as we've gone over, open verdicts have been concluded in some instances, meaning that it's not really clear what happened. Many of these types of cases were probably accidents, and there are cases where I think something else may genuinely have happened, and we may simply never know what it was. As things stand, GMP's official position remains unchanged. There is no pusher, and no link between the cases. The man on the CCTV with Souvik Pal on New Year's Eve 2012 has never been identified. The man who attacked the cyclist in 2018 has never been caught. Whatever terrified David Plunkett on that phone call has never been explained. These cases remain officially closed, but some of the questions they have left behind have not been answered either. What do you make of this topic in general? I'd genuinely be very interested to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think this is a case of coincidence driven by geography and drinking? Or do you think at least some of these cases are something more than that? That about brings us to the end of this. I'd just like to take the time to thank you for watching, and a big thank you to the patrons who've been running around on the screen. If you found the video interesting, then please do remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you didn't like it, then feel free to give me a thumbs down. I'm just looking for your honest opinion either way. I hope that you've had a great day or evening, depending on where you are, and I'll see you in the next one. Be safe guys, look after each other, and peace.